Every now and then I allow myself, and I try not to be mean-spirited about it, to say something about Paul Krugman. But his last two pieces I found amazing. And here's why. He writes these pieces. I assume many of you see his work in the New York Times or elsewhere. He writes a column every few days. And it's reprinted very widely. And he talks about his frustration with the American economic situation, the lack of real recovery. He's good about that. The crazy policy of the government, which is against getting us out of this mess. He's good about that too. But he constantly talks about we. We have a confused policy. We have a counter-effective approach. We don't understand. And he makes it out as though it's like, well, let me read to you. There's a bitter, I'm quoting, there's a bitter irony because one main reason we've done so little about unemployment is the preaching of the deficit scolds, those who have wrapped themselves in the mantle of long-run responsibility. We've done ourselves immense long-term damage. Mr. Krugman needs to believe that there's a we here, all of us together. We confront the fact that some of us have a bad set of ideas. This is a professor. People haven't learned it properly. And he's giving a stern lecture to those silly people, the ones who get a D on the exam. You didn't get it. Here's how it actually is. And he's very annoyed, having won a Nobel Prize, that everybody isn't keeling over in gratitude for him having cleared up their confused D-level exam. But the problem is that Mr. Krugman's ideas, classic Keynesianism, government should intervene, government should borrow money, government should stimulate the economy, all of that. Shouldn't be cutting back on expenditure, you should be increasing, all of that. What Mr. Krugman doesn't seem to want to face is that the problem isn't the idea. The problem never was the idea. The problem is whether, it's awful when you can't turn it off, right? What? It's all right, it's all right. It's all right. The problem isn't an idea. So let me remind you again of the history. In the 1930s, we had a terrible depression. And the same Keynesian ideas, that's when they erupted, were common then. The government should intervene. Remember? Roosevelt did that. He intervened with Social Security. He intervened with unemployment compensation. He intervened with a federal jobs program that hired millions of unemployed people. He created the first minimum wage. He passed a law allowing trade unions to represent workers. He did extraordinary things. Is that because he had the idea that Mr. Krugman wants us to get? No. Having the idea is the least of it. Having the political force to get the idea dealt with, that's the trick. Ideas are easy. Lots of us have real good ideas. But we go to our deaths with these good ideas because we haven't got the organized power to realize them. What happened in the 1930s wasn't good ideas for Mr. Keynes and others. They were there, and I don't want to take away from what Keynes achieved. Certainly was a great economist. But what made the difference in the 1930s was organized mass power. The powerful Communist Party, two powerful socialist parties, and the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO. Organizing millions of people into tightly organized institutions, unions and political parties that carefully collaborated while fending off the police, the government, the army, all of that. Maybe difficult and awkward to face, But that's the reality. That is the reality. Mr. Roosevelt changed his mind. He found persuasive the very ideas that he hadn't found persuasive 2 years earlier. But what intervened was mass organized power. And what frustrates Mr. Krugman right now, and what he apparently doesn't see, is that he can spin out his good ideas, and many of them are, and his good criticisms. And he can continue to feel as frustrated as I would imagine many of you do, because there isn't an organized political power to translate those ideas into real historical force. And as long as we don't do that, the we in his mind is going to continue to exist. I'm going to come back to that we in a couple of minutes.